You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Joker's Millions. Hey, Joshua.
Yes, Caleb?
Joshua, speaking of Joker's Millions, would you say this is the millionth workmanlike Joker story we've seen on the show? Because it sure does starting to feel like it.
I think that I like this one better than workmanlike, but if I'm going to lay this out right now, this is a little tipping my hand. I think you're right, but there are maybe two, definitely one better than workmanlike ideas that elevate it slightly.
All right.
But it's not mind-blowing, and I'd like to see a mind-blowing one, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. And this is, when I say workmanlike, and again, for longtime listeners, we've heard us say this a million times. All right, it's Batman and Joker doing another Batman Joker story. Harley's becoming more prominent, so that's really, really good. That's a real huge positive. And I think the inherent premise of this one is a lot of fun.
Yes,
I do like it better than several of the episodes that we would call workmanlike Joker stories. It is one of the better ones for sure. But at the end of the day, it still feels like another, like, the status quo in no way has really changed. And the ending, not like it was a bad ending, it just felt like it ended in a really tame sort of way that lets the Joker off.
The actual final scene of the episode is probably the best thing in the entire episode. But it doesn't necessarily tie directly to the main stuff that was going on in the episode. Boy, will we get into it. But let's take a moment to talk about what I think is the only new design in this episode that we haven't discussed before, and that is the Penguin.
Such an interesting time to get a character redesign for the Penguin in a Joker episode.
Well, yeah, but they've also transitioned him out of actual minute-by-minute, day-by-day criminal and more into a fixer, type of situation at the Iceberg Lounge.
Right.
Which is topical with what the comic books were doing at the time and is also probably a wise choice with the Penguin, as he's I feel like a really compelling concept that does not get played out in super compelling ways most of the time. In fact, now this is a big digression before I actually talk about what the Penguin looked like in this episode, but I want to say to you, because I've spoken of how The Batman, the animated series that directly followed this one and had nothing to do with it, is not the best Batman cartoon, but because they were specifically having to do things very differently than BTAS and New Adventures, they wind up with this spectacular Penguin. They make the Cobblepots an old money family in Gotham also, like alongside the Waynes, but they are ones with really bad reputations and they've squandered their fortune. So when the Penguin comes back, he is a foil for Bruce Wayne as Oswald Cobblepot and also a foil for Batman as the Penguin. That's a great take that makes it really personal and interesting to Batman. Just a guy who owns a ice-themed restaurant is not spectacular, and I think that's also how I would describe his new look.
Yeah, Joshua, thanks again for that context there, because I'll be honest, I made that note, but the Penguin has never been the most compelling version of the character in this iteration. We see him even on that the live action show Gotham, which is I've got mixed feelings about overall, but they do a really good job at making the Penguin a lot more compelling. But here he just is pretty much, he's just an organized crime type of guy who works in the shadows, which isn't always boring, but they don't really do a lot to make him not he's kind of boring. Well,
let's compare him. Let's compare him to the last really good example that we had of that. Let's compare even this version of the Penguin, which visually, we'll talk about this in a minute, I do think is an improvement, but not a big one.
Right.
It's actually, well, hold on. I don't want to get on that train just yet. But let's compare this version of Penguin to the last person we had standing in that space, Rupert Thorne.
Right.
And let me ask you, would you rather see a Penguin episode or a Rupert Thorne episode?
Oh, Rupert Thorne, hands down.
Every day, twice on Sundays. Yeah. Now, as for the look, I do feel like this is an improvement on the look, but that's largely because the last one was the worst possible option. Like, it just happened to come out after Batman Returns, and so he has to look like he did in Batman Returns, which at least that was thematically important to Batman Returns, and it's never important to BTAS or New Batman Adventures.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. This is an improvement. It feels more streamlined. It looks less... something... I don't want to... I hope this does not come across as harsh. I never liked the design. He was very rounded fellow. The nose was a little... It was just... And I know this is an animated show, but the thing about the Cobblepot, at least in all the iterations I've encountered, is you're supposed to feel like he's a real guy that's not been like amped up on drugs or anything. He just might have a condition, maybe. They made him look a little too much like a bird for me to really take him seriously, and that sounds kind of mean, but like
No, I think you're onto something, because let me tell you, being a man of a certain age, right? I remember the Superpowers action figure line from the 80s, and this penguin looks just like that penguin who looks just like he looked in the comics in the 60s. Like, they don't bother to make him less cartoonish. Outside of some of our obvious examples, like, you know, your Clayfaces or your Banes, most of these villains look like people, and the penguin does not, which he looks like a caricature or like a cartoon.
Right.
And I think that's why I still count this as an improvement, because I thought the last design was so bad, but it's not really an improvement on its own merits. It's an improvement over what we had before.
Right, exactly. Because now I would say that he's satisfactory. Like, I wouldn't say it's a great penguin design. It looks it looks like a character that would be doing what the penguin's doing, and but nothing particularly great or standout about it. You're just like, okay, this looks like a pretty run-of-the-mill penguin design.
That guy looks like the penguin, which is the last guy. I was like, that guy looks like Danny DeVito as the penguin, which is exactly what they meant to do, but that doesn't mean they should have. But you know what? There's probably like some, Warner Brothers mandated brand synergy stuff going on, even though he never looked like that in the comics. So I don't know. Anyway, I think that's our only new character this episode, though. Am I right? Do you feel the same?
As far as I could track, Joshua, that does appear to be the only one that I take note of that was worth speaking about anyhow. And I would say, again, nice. It was nice to see the introduction, and I do think that we're kind of getting into the actual episode now. That the use of Penguin here was very cool. He's able to work in the shadows. He's able to like rub shoulders with people like the Joker, but also under the table be kind of masterminding at least a faction of the city's crimes. That's pretty neat. I did like that aspect of it.
This was actually a shift that happened in the comics, I think, mainly around a giant year-long storyline called No Man's Land. He already had the Iceberg Lounge before that, but No Man's Land I've spoken of it before. There's a big earthquake, Gotham is knocked down, America decides Gotham doesn't get to be part of America anymore, blows up the bridges and leaves, okay? The Penguin is basically the last bastion of civilization in this torn down Gotham, because he has a black market connection to the outside world. So he can still get you batteries and potable water and stuff like that, right? And so when they rebuild Gotham, he just kind of stays in that fixer role, and it works very well for him. Yeah, so anyway, I feel like we've spent more time on Penguin than we should, just because the possibilities of Penguin are maybe more interesting than some of what we actually do in this episode, which I actually like, but let's just be honest.
Yeah. Now that we're at least, I think we're almost 10 minutes into the recording of this episode, and we still haven't even talked about the Joker, really. But no, I would agree. What they present as the potential future of the Penguin is very compelling. Whether or not they do anything good with this potential, we'll find out in future episodes.
We'll find out. We'll let you know. Yeah.
Now, Joshua, here's one thing I wanted to point out. Back when we were talking about Batman the Animated Series and not the New Batman Adventures, we talked about the title cards. And of course, when we made the switch to New Batman Adventures, no more title cards. That said, some of these episodes still open like on a very striking image.
Yes, they nod at title cards, right? They're like title card adjacent.
Yes. And I actually really dig the opening where it's like sitting with the computer open, and how I just thought it was a really clever way to include the credit, like the opening credits, because you see Paul
absolutely.
Denny and Dan Reba's names, and then it just segues straight into the action of the episode. So it's a less of a break, but it feels like a title card that just in real time goes right into the episode. So I thought it was pretty neat. I liked it a lot.
I like that a lot also, not the least of which because it ties into one of these weird artifacts of 60s Batman comic books that I really like when they try and bring back and make relevant, which is there were always, running all through the 60s, and I think it's because the artist Dick Sprang really liked to draw this stuff, they were always dealing with completely mundane objects blown up to giant proportions, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they would wind up fighting people in music museums, right? Like the Music Meister or something like that, in a music museum that has giant trombones and stuff that they can play on. And doing that with giant computers and giant CD-ROMs and stuff, I guarantee, I mean, again, we've talked about these guys are Batman fans. They were nodding towards that. And as a longtime Batman fan, I really like it. But you don't actually have to know that's what they're doing for it to still be cool and really work, which is the best way to do an homage, in my opinion.
No. Here's the thing about this, Joshua. And again, this is one of my first interactions with Batman ever when I was a kid. And
yes, yeah.
You're spot on. It feels like Batman. I like how that nod led to forming the way I view Batman, which is there's always giant versions of things like pennies or computers. It just feels like a no pun intended way to make it larger than life. Like it's
that's Gotham is not New York City, you know? Like it's both worse and better and weirder, but in positive and negative ways. Yeah. I love that stuff. I really like everything that makes Gotham feel like its own space, even when it's nodding at New York stuff. Like I know we've seen the Statue of Justice in the harbor at Gotham. I mean, that says something about Gotham that really sets it apart from New York, especially when you get to know it better as not a place that values justice very much at all, really. I mean, at least on the surface. Anyway, yeah. So best kind of homage, really liked it. And I like it very much as a setup for how much money trouble the Joker is in.
Oh, 100%.
We see it right away. He runs out of bullets, they run out of gas, they don't even make it out with the take, and that is cataclysmic. I do have a little conversation with myself about whether the Joker could really only afford one ejection seat, or if he's just, you know, letting Harley get captured. I think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. One note, and then I definitely have thoughts on that. But one note, just before we move on past the giant life-size objects, one thing I noticed, as a fun little Easter egg for viewers in the year 2020, the tech fair showing the cutting-edge technology of DVDs. Was on the screen.
Right?
Anyway, just a small thing. It was like, the future of DVDs. And here we are.
Every now and then, this show just slaps you in the face with the fact that it was mid to late 90s. Every now and then. Yeah. So, absolutely.
But that's I would consider that a charming reminder of
totally.
the 90s. Yeah. Now, to the piece about Harley. I mean, it's all about how you choose to use your resources, right? I'm sure
it's all about priorities.
I'm sure at one point the Joker did have the resources to build in 2 seats, but decided not to, and then decided in the moment, well, if anyone's gonna get away, when I had the money, I built 1 seat. And because there's only 1 seat in that car, I'm going to make sure that I'm the one who's using it and not tell Harley about it. So it's like, he probably could have afforded it when he built the car, but didn't because he's cheap. And then, so that's selfish decision number 1. Selfish decision number 2 is, all right, well, we've only got this car that's got 1 in it, but I guess I'm going to make sure I'm the one who's driving the getaway car in this scenario. So, either way, Joker's a selfish scab. So there you go.
Right, yeah. And I do like the setup of him being broke and then just a gift from above. And I actually think we kind of go on a little journey with the Joker as he's reading that letter, right? He's like, oh, Barlow, I hated that guy. Oh, wait, he left me money. I love him. And then it turns out to be a con by Barlow, that is the one good idea that I think is honestly better than the episode winds up being. Yeah.
No, strong idea. And here's the thing I like about this, Joshua. Again, something we've talked about the Joker frequently is his ego being his downfall and in so many scenarios. And it's funny that he was apparently so desperate for money that and like the assumption that he's the Joker, that no one would ever pull a con on him like that. That he would not more closely inspect them. Because that's the thing. The money wasn't hard to inspect. He just didn't inspect it.
He just didn't do it.
He just didn't do it. And I think Harlow knew that and took advantage of it. You know, again, it's in my mind, he is making very rash, stupid decisions because of his ego at the end of the day.
Yes.
And it's also what we see, the way that his selfishness and his ego keep him from seeing how valuable a partner that Harley Quinn is. So he's so selfish and so uncaring about it and so self-centered that he doesn't realize that you can't just hire another Harley Quinn. And like, you know, it's... I actually thought that whole gag was pretty funny and kind of just highlights how little he actually cares about her, that he's like, we can hire someone else to replace her, you know?
No, I think that's a big deal. And I actually think that's the other idea that is elevated higher than this episode actually is. And I think it's the idea that they didn't entirely mean to do. Like, I honestly think they mostly just wanted to go to a gag of a fake Harley who's bad at being Harley, right? But being a man who is deeply enjoying the new Harley Quinn animated series on DC Universe, when I look at that, I'm like, oh, that's actually a thesis on how competent and vital and useful and strong in her own right Harley is. But I'm not sure that they meant to do that, because it really does get pretty short shrift in the episode itself. No, absolutely. They play it for a gag at the end of the day, which is like the "how dare you replace me?" You know, that's kind of Harley's reaction. But I think, yeah, you know, intentionally or not, like it's pretty clear that this lookalike is not the same in terms of efficiency or effectiveness. And I'll get the quote. Commitment or interest or intelligence or anything really. Yeah. She's a few inches taller. That's about all she's got going for her. The exact quote from the Joker I have here, quote unquote, "She's too expensive. It'll just be cheaper to hire a new one." Wow. Whew, boy. That's terrible. Yeah. And this is what happens when you just try and replace somebody who's really good with somebody who's adequate but cheaper. Like, you can tell the difference. Yeah. And who just inherited well, at least he believes he just inherited $250 million too. And that's the other piece about the ego. Which he throws away. And we'll talk about that, because that montage is pretty good too. He throws away, but decides to cut corners on Harley. Like, that's why I say that is a really interesting idea that's better than most of this episode, but it's not really the thing they want to talk about. Oh, 100%. No. And I want to circle back to the ego thing, because here's the other thing. He could have just been honest about the fact that he got conned, and he would have gotten off. Like, from a legal perspective, he could have gotten off and been honest about believing that he got conned. But he did not want the criminal world to see that he got conned, so he would rather just like try to like find a way around it somehow. I just think it's hilarious that it's like, technically, by law, I'm sure you could have come out and said, actually, I was conned. There was only like 20 million or whatever. But because he did not want his reputation tarnished, he had to downplay that. It's just wild to me. It's just that the Joker's, he's always the tools of his demise are always like, he just doesn't want to look a certain way or be stood up or beaten. Yes. You know? Yes. And I will say, I like that. Now, I don't think there's enough oxygen in the room for this, but reading between the lines a little bit, I really like how at the end, this experience has beaten him down to the point that he will swallow his ego enough to pull a heist that isn't obviously his heist. That's true. But can you imagine him doing that at the beginning? No. So this has actually been an extremely humbling experience for him in practice, but because we kind of spend a lot of time on the montage, which the I'm Rich montage is very good, but it just kind of like, honestly, I wish that they had cut all the Harley stuff and just done an episode that was about him trying to replace Harley and focused on the, oh my God, a practical joke has been played on the Joker in this episode.
Yes, yeah, and he's just living the high life, blowing all this money he has. Yeah, no, 100%, 100% agreed. Yeah, the montage, he buys the mansion, paints it purple. I thought it was really funny when he's golfing and is totally just trying to mess with Bruce Wayne's game. I thought all of that was gold. It was so funny. I laughed audibly. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yes, all that was really strong. Even the kind of more mundane of just throwing the money outside of his car, as I'm watching this with my son, and he's like, yeah, I don't think that's what I'd do with my money. And I was like, correct, because you are a wiser individual than the Joker, high five. But it's funny, even though it's relatively banal. Let's also, this is a moment for your history lesson. I know you know this. You are an educated, smart man, but trivia is fun. Because the IRS is how we actually got the real world Al Capone, I love the idea that it's the IRS that gets the Joker here.
Oh, it's so good.
And the bit where he says, I'm crazy enough to take on the Batman, but the IRS, no, is just chef kiss. Oh. That feels very authentically Joker to me.
That was the funniest thing. And I mean, this episode was very funny, just on a whole, but that was the line I think I laughed the most at, because he's like, I'll fight people in the streets. I'll fight dudes with like an unlimited arsenal of gadgets, but the government, I don't know. Just
who
amazing.
Yeah. They don't care if you're legally insane. They just want you to pay their taxes. Yeah.
Which also ties in really well at the end when he's like, well, now I'm back to the taxpayers footing the bill when he gets back and when he gets arrested. So I don't know.
Yes.
Funny.
Yes. It's kind of a bow, like ties a bow on the IRS side of things. But it also ends with what I think is legitimately the best joke in the entire episode, which is Harley's join the club, which is both terrifying and hilarious.
Oh, so funny.
So once again, we're giving Harley much better lines than the Joker. It's very interesting, but also not surprising to me that she became kind of a breakout hit from this show.
Oh yeah, no, they knew how to write Harley to ample effect, and I think even when she's not the featured character in the episode, or even like the featured B plot, they find a way to really give her some moments to shine. I also just want to compliment this episode on the writing as a whole. I mean, every Joker episode that's written by Paul Dini usually has some good lines in here. Yes. The one that I laughed the most uncomfortably at, and it was kind of in shock that it got past the censors, was drown the kids and shoot the neighbors. We've got a winner. I was like,
wow. You do wonder. You just want to be a fly on the wall sometimes, Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Can we? They're like, and I'm sure they're like, well, Mark Hamill can give that line. He can deliver that line in a way that will catch people off guard enough that they won't catch it. I don't know. It was hilarious and like, oh my god, how did this get on TV?
So I think we can both agree that this is a good episode that honestly could have been great, and we kind of wish that it was great, but we'll accept good, right? Like, it's good.
Yeah.
But we wish that it were a little more, I don't know exactly what I want. Maybe like I said, just split off your B plot and just do the A plot. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if they had chosen one or the other as the focus, they could have made two great Joker episodes out of it. Because I do like, to your point, I really think the stronger component here is definitely the practical joke. The Joker's just been played a practical joke.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun to see him just like have at it, like being legally allowed to just throw money around and all that stuff's great, only for it to come bite him in the butt later. I thought that was great stuff. And I do like the Harley stuff, but I think a separate episode for that would have done both of these storylines justice. But I think if you're going to make a list of the Batman versus Joker episodes, this one would, I mean, I haven't made a full list myself yet, but I would say this would make the top 10 maybe, but just barely. It would.
Oh yeah, no. It's good. Yeah, it's enjoyable. It's some good Joker stuff. Now that said, if somebody enjoyed whatever was going on in this episode, what other alternative media recs would you make to them?
Joshua, I've got 3 for you, and they're all movies of varying levels of funny and dramatic. The first up is the Wes Anderson 2014 film, The Grand Budapest Hotel. I will not spoil it, but just know that the inheritance of a woman who passes away is the core plot driver for our main characters. But it's a great movie about people who inherit something and don't know quite what to do with it.
Yes.
I don't want to say much more than that because it's a lot of fun. If you're familiar with the works of Wes Anderson, you know it is all him. Just it's his brand of humor. The symmetry and the camera angles is there. The really quirky characters, the really dry humor, all that's present. So I highly recommend that. It's probably one of my favorite films he's ever made. Well, my next one is actually a Korean film called The Handmaiden. And another one that I don't really want to say too much about, but just know that it is a story about a women conning inheritance away from a very terrible person. But what they don't realize is the person they're trying to con is also a con artist. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game with conning. And I'll also say if you want to see the patriarchy burn down, it's probably a good movie for you to watch because you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So
highly recommended just on that point.
So The Handmaiden, 2017, I believe it is currently streaming on Amazon. And then the last one is just another movie I really enjoy. It's a comedy about people competing for an inheritance. It's called Rat Race from 2001. It's got one of those ensemble casts that and when the movie came out in 2001 was like your all stars because you've got like Whoopi Goldberg and you've got Cuba Gooding Jr. You've got the guy I can't remember his name. He played Mr. Bean. Like all these actors who were like really big names at the time in the comedy scene. All basically playing these really over the top. Oh, Seth Green was in there somewhere too, I think.
Yeah.
All these really well-known comedic actors kind of coming in playing these wild roles, and they're all trying to race from this casino all the way to this really small locker where this money is being stored, and whoever gets there first will win the money. Meanwhile, I guess I'm kind of spoiling, but meanwhile, the people who set this up are all like betting about who's going to win the race. So it's definitely a movie that feels of its time. It feels very early 2000s, but I also think it's a lot of fun to watch, and it's a lot of fun to watch to see rich people flaunt their money only to reap the consequences of their actions down the road. So all that's good stuff.
Let's see that in the real world. May that tribe increase.
Yes, please. Yeah. Joshua, how about yourself? What recommendations do you have for people who enjoyed this episode?
I only have one, and it's obvious to me that this is where they got the title of this episode, but I'm actually a big, big fan of this movie. I'll admit partly because it was on the HBO rotation when I was a kid, but it legit holds up. And that movie is 1985's Brewster's Millions, starring, among other people, Richard Pryor and John Candy as our leads. Are you familiar with this film?
I am familiar with this film. I have not seen this film in probably about 10 plus years, but this is a great combo, Joshua. I love both of those actors. I think they have great chemistry, and just the premise. It is basically anyone who watched this episode and found any enjoyment from the premise of this episode will find much to love about Brewster's Millions.
So the basic idea is that Richard Pryor, who is a minor league baseball pitcher and not a great one, is fired from his job. And just about the time that he finds out he's fired as a pitcher, his life's work is over, he discovers that he has inherited $30 million from his great uncle, his Caucasian great uncle, I might add, with a stipulation. And that stipulation is he has to spend $1 million a day minimum for 30 days. And if he does, he wins $300 million. Now, there are, of course, some rules. He cannot own anything. He can have no assets at the end of the month. So he must literally be back to zero. He can't just buy expensive things and destroy them, to use up the money. There are some rules that make it more complicated. But what it really becomes is he starts to look very much like the kind of person he hates while he's doing it, and watching his friends and loved ones slowly decide that he's just become a rich jackass, only to have the big reveal at the end. It's very good. It's very funny. I really recommend it. And there is a very interesting political outlook that shows up in about the tail end of the second act and into the third act that I won't spoil. But when he decides to waste a bunch of money by running for governor, he does so with a message that I feel resonates very seriously with me in the year of our Lord 2020.
Oof. Hashtag relevant content. I hadn't thought about that, to be honest, Joshua, because I haven't thought about this movie in a long time, but I would echo that sentiment. It's worth a rewatch. It's good, and I'm sure it plays very interesting if you were to watch it today.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I am at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, Joshua, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique. We publish in-depth essays on all types of films, and you can find those articles over at thecinematropolis.com, along with our podcast, The Cinematic Schematic.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about the Superman episodes, The Main Man, Parts 1 and 2.
So until then, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.